In 1937, Hollywood released the film The Good Earth. It was a romantic drama based on a 1931 novel of the same name by the Nobel Prize-winning author Pearl S. Buck. The movie was about the struggles of the Chinese farmer Wang Lung and his relationship with his wife, O Lan. The overall plot was intriguing and presented a favorable image of China. The movie turned out to be wildly successful and even won an Academy Award for Best Cinematography. This movie was no doubt a Hollywood classic. However, anyone watching it today would immediately notice a problem. Even though the movie is about Chinese farmers, all the main characters are played by white actors. In fact, the only roles in the film played by Chinese actors are all minor roles. This practice of casting non-Asian actors in Asian roles is not uncommon in Hollywood. In fact, it is so common that it has its own name. Yellowface, a term that originally referred to the prosthetic makeup that actors put on to look Asian. This technique has been used countless times in films all throughout the 1900s. It effectively prevented Asian American actors from playing anything more than minor roles in films, because all the major roles could be taken on by white actors through yellowface. It wasn't until 1915 did an Asian American actor finally break the barrier and achieve stardom. This actor would later become one of the highest paid actors of his time and earn $2 million a year through his own production company. This actor was Sessue Hayakawa. Sessue Hayakawa was born in Chiba, Japan, into an aristocratic family. His father was a local provincial governor and intended for him to be a naval officer. However, a swimming accident ruptured Hayakawa's eardrums, causing him to fail the officer test. Sad and depressed, he attempted suicide through the samurai tradition of seppuku, but was saved by his father. After he recovered, Hayakawa traveled to the United States to study political economics at the University of Chicago. However, he quit school after only his second year, deciding that he would go back to Japan. In an act of pure serendipity, he stumbled into a Japanese theater during his wait in Los Angeles for the ship back home, and thus became interested in acting. Hayakawa made his debut in the 1914 silent film The Typhoon, and appeared again a year later in The Cheat, where he played an evil Japanese merchant who attempted to seduce the female protagonist. The movie was very successful, making Hayakawa extremely popular, especially among the female audience. He soon became a romantic idol in Hollywood, or, as some would put it, a sex symbol. This would turn out to be both a blessing and a curse for Hayakawa. There was no denying that he was popular, but he would always be typecasted into playing two major Asian stereotypes: the desirable exotic lover, and the evil villain who deceives with his good looks. These two stereotypes would later go on to become deeply embedded in Hollywood. Tired of being typecasted, Hayakawa started his own production company in 1918, the Hayworth Pictures Corporation. The company would go on to make 23 films in the next 3 years, earning $2 million a year and escalating his fame to rival that of Charlie Chaplin and Douglas Fairbanks. Directing, producing, and acting in his own films, Hayakawa made many movies that broke Hollywood stereotypes for Asians and finally achieved his dream of playing a hero. His 1919 film, The Dragon Painter, in which he and his wife played the male and female protagonists, was one of the first films that broke out of stereotypes and portrayed Asians in a positive light. Despite Hayakawa's great success in Hollywood, few other Asian American actors during that time managed to achieve stardom or break out of being typecasted. In addition, his fame did not stop the industry from favoring yellowface over actual Asian American actors. To make it worse, Hollywood was on its way to develop even more Asian stereotypes. In 1915, Madame Butterfly, a film adaptation of a famous opera, was released. The movie casted the famous Canadian-American actress Mary Pickford as the film's tragic heroine, Chiyo-Chiyo-san. The plot described a Japanese woman who loved and married a white officer, only to be abandoned by him right after marriage. She later committed suicide after her husband returned with a new wife and demanded to bring back his child. The film gave start to the stereotype that Asian women fall easily in love with white men. This would later on evolve into the stereotype of China dolls, exotic Asian women who are willing to please and are easily cast aside. Over the next 30 years, Hayakawa would branch out into Europe and expand into the theater industry. His popularity, however, gradually declined, especially in the midst of the World War II anti-Japanese sentiment. In his shadow rose a brand new star, a Chinese-American girl from Los Angeles with humble beginnings but great talents. Her name was Anna May Wong, and she would become one of the most well-known Asian American actresses from the 1920s to the 1940s.
Wong was born and raised in Los Angeles, 1 block north of the city's Chinatown. Her parents were both second-generation Asian Americans who had 6 other children and ran a local laundromat. Wong attended a public school in her youth along with the local Mexican and Eastern European kids, but was forced to move to a Presbyterian Chinese school when she became the target of racial taunts. Wong started her acting career as an extra in 1919's The Red Lantern. After dropping out of high school in 1921 to pursue a full-time acting career, she appeared in several more films, including The Tolls of the Sea. Released in 1922, the movie was loosely based on Madame Butterfly and was also one of the first films shot in color. Wong played the role of Lotus Flower in the film, who was a stereotypical character that easily fell in love with the white man and was later abandoned. Her leading performance in the film demonstrated her outstanding acting talents, but Hollywood didn't quite know what to do with her due to her ethnicity. In 1924, Wong starred in The Thief of Baghdad alongside Douglas Fairbanks. She played the role of a Mongol slave that was modeled after the Asian stereotype of the Dragon Lady, a deceiving and backstabbing woman who seduces with her beauty. Although she was only a supporting actress, her outstanding performance and exotic beauty attracted the attention of many and quickly ascended her to stardom. Over the next few years, she would go on to star in many other supporting roles, including the 1929 European movie Piccadilly, in which she played another dragon lady. The Lotus Flower was in full blossom. Unfortunately, Wong's early career was filled with stereotypical Asian roles. Many of these roles also emphasized her sex appeal with revealing costumes. The advancement in her career was blocked by anti-miscegenation laws, a series of legislation that criminalized interracial marriage and romantic relationships. This meant that in order to be a female lead, she had to be romantically linked to an Asian male lead, which was extremely rare during this time. These restrictive laws, the same ones that also kept Hayakawa from playing lead roles with white female actresses, were the main barriers to the success of most Asian American actors at the time. After working for a few years in Europe, Anna May Wong returned to the United States and played her last Dragon Lady role in the 1931 movie The Daughter of the Dragon, where she acted alongside Setsu Hayakawa. Her subsequent on-screen appearances portrayed Asian Americans in a more positive manner. In 1937, she finally fulfilled her dreams and played the role of the female lead in The Daughter of Shanghai, which also cast Philip Ahn as the male lead. This was one of the first major movies that featured Asian male and female protagonists in a positive light. Anna May Wong spent the rest of her years acting and fighting for the rights of Asian American actors. She even went on tour in China and visited her ancestral town of Taishan, Guangdong, in order to get in touch with her Chinese roots. Unfortunately, the Chinese Nationalist Government Party denounced her profession as an actress, calling her a disgrace for being a sex symbol in Hollywood. The people of Hong Kong did not receive her warmly either. After coming back to the States, Wong reflected, "I am convinced that I could never play in the Chinese theater. I have no feeling for it. It's a pretty sad situation to be rejected by Chinese because I'm too American, and by American producers because they prefer other races to act Chinese parts." Despite Wong's success in the American film industry, Asian Americans were still considered outsiders. The practice of yellowface also continued to thrive. One of the most famous yellowface movies of the time was Fu Manchu, released in 1932, starring Boris Karloff as the villain. Fu Manchu was an extension of the stereotypical role of the evil Asian man. There were also yellowface movies that portrayed Asian culture in a positive light, and some even tried to cast Asian actors as leads from the start. The Charlie Chan movies, which were very popular during the 20th century, actually started out with Asian actors playing the charming Honolulu detective protagonist. When these initial films failed to reach financial success, however, the production companies were forced to shift actors and cast Warner Oland to take the role while donning yellowface, which then allowed the series to take off and gain popularity. It seems that the public was still not ready to fully accept Asian American protagonists. However, the audience did start to get used to seeing Asian roles on screen, and Asian American presence was getting bigger than ever in the movie industry.
When the 1940s came around, a number of Asian American actors and actresses surfaced in Hollywood. Actors such as Key Luke, Philip Ahn, and Victor Sen Yang contributed significantly to the Asian American presence in Hollywood during this time. Philip Ahn was the first Asian American actor to receive a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, while Key Luke became the most well-known Asian American actor of his time. There were other famous actors as well, such as Cam Tong, Chester Gan, Benson Fong, Merle Oberon, and Toshi Mori. However, many of these actors were still strapped in Hollywood's stereotypical Asian roles. One of the most famous Asian American actresses was Nancy Kwan. Born in Hong Kong, Kwon went abroad to study dance in England when she was 18. During her time abroad, she auditioned for a role in the film The World of Susie Wong. While her first screening went badly, she worked hard to improve her skills through drama lessons and even took an acting class in Hollywood. Her third screening finally impressed the producer, Ray Stark. Kwon ultimately won the title role after her competitor, the French actress France Nguyen, was fired. The film, released in 1960, was an instant hit. Kwon won numerous awards, including the Golden Globe for Most Promising Female Newcomer and the award for A Star of Tomorrow. The British film's take on interracial romance between the white male lead and the Asian female lead also brought a new perspective to the American audience. Scholar Jennifer Leah Chance of NYU wrote that Kwon's role in The World of Susie Wong was the most significant role for Asian American actresses since Anna May Wong. Kwon's acting career also turned out to be very similar to that of Anna May Wong's. Due to her revealing clothing in the movie, Kwon was popularized as yet another sex symbol. The scene of Kwon flashing her thigh in a dazzling cheongsam became an iconic image and further cemented her reputation of being sexy and attractive. Kwon appeared a year later in The Flower Drum Song, a film based off of a Broadway musical, and was distinguished for being the first big-budget American film with a nearly all-Asian cast. Although the film did not do well in box office, it was still notable for its revolutionary casting selection, unseen before in any other movie. Despite the efforts of Asian American actors to better the image of Asians in media, there were many factors during this time period that prevented overall progress. World War II probably had the biggest impact to anything else during the era. Although Americans' perception towards Chinese Americans were improved due to China's alliance with the US in the war, many Americans perceived Japanese Americans negatively because of Japan's involvement with the Germans. The media released during this time perfectly reflected this sentiment. Movies such as Little Tokyo USA, released in 1942, casted Chinese-American actor Richard Liu as its protagonist and portrayed Japanese Americans as traitors to the United States. Another anti-Japanese film, Dragon Seed, released in 1944, starred Academy Award winner Katharine Hepburn in Yellowface as a Chinese woman protecting her village from Japanese invaders. Ironically, although the movie was supposed to be pro-Chinese, the act of casting a white actress as the Chinese protagonist itself angered many Chinese Americans. The all-encompassing theme in all of these wartime movies was the hatred towards the Japanese people. Asian American presence in the media was in a polarized situation in which Chinese Americans and Japanese Americans received opposite sentiments.
Oh, it will be a States Army.
The practice of Yellowface didn't have a negative impact on all movies, however. In the 1956 release of the film, The Tea House of an August Moon, Marlon Brando, a prominent white actor at the time, donned yellowface to portray a manipulative Japanese character. Brando spent over 2 hours in makeup to make him appear Asian, and successfully tricked audiences into thinking that he wasn't even in the movie. Even with its yellowface casting, the movie's portrayal of interracial marriages increased racial tolerance in the United States and presented an alternative to the anti-miscegenation laws.
From 1960 to 2000, the number of Asian American actors in Hollywood increased significantly. Prominent examples include Pat Morita, Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, Jet Li, George Takei, Meiko Iwamatsu, Ken Leung, Lucy Liu, and James Hong. Bruce Lee in particular was often regarded as the most well-known Asian American actor. Born as Lee Jin-fan in San Francisco's Chinatown, Lee spent his early years in Hong Kong. Growing up in a tumultuous time under Japanese occupation and gang fighting, Lee started learning martial arts after losing to a fight with a rival gang member. He became extremely skilled at martial arts, but was sent by his father to live with his older sister in the States due to his aggressive nature. At this point, Lee had several championship titles under his belt. He would later enroll in the University of Washington and develop his own style of martial arts known as Jeet Kune Do. Because his father was an influential opera star, Lee was exposed to the film industry at a very young age and had appeared in over 20 films by the time he was 18. Despite his familiarity with films, he had always planned to pursue martial arts instead of film. However, during a martial arts exhibition, he was invited by William Dozier to be in the television pilot for Number One Son. Although the show never aired, Lee was invited to act in another show called The Green Hornet, which is an adaptation of the famous comic series of the same name. Following a season on the show, Lee started acting and choreographing martial arts for movies. In 1971, Lee developed the concept of a TV series named The Warriors for Warner Brothers. Although the production company took his idea, Lee was denied a role in his own show due to his thick accent. Not happy with his supporting roles in the US, Lee returned to Hong Kong to star in Fist of Fury and Way of the Dragon, both of which catapulted him to stardom. Lee starred in Game of Death and Enter the Dragon before his unfortunate death in 1973. Lee's contribution to the image of Asian Americans in media was very significant. In fact, the stereotypical role of the Chinese martial artist perpetuated partly because of his appearances in film. Tough guy appearance also promoted the image of the manly Asian American. Progress did not end there. In 1967, the infamous anti-miscegenation laws were finally repealed in the United States. With the ban on portraying interracial relationships finally removed, a flurry of films emerged that featured relationships between white characters and characters of other races. Bridge to the Sun was one of these movies, telling the story of a woman who marries a Japanese officer and journeys to Japan after World War II. This post-World War II film broke away from the norm by telling the story from the perspective of the Japanese. Yet another war that left its mark on this time period was the Vietnam War, and once again, Hollywood sensationalized the war in its films and its depiction of Asians. The 1959 film Five Gates to Hell, for example, depicted the American army conquering the communists in Southeast Asia and resulted in the public's increase in anti-Asian sentiments. Another film to specifically address the Vietnam War was To the Shores of Hell, which illustrated the communist army as ruthless and cruel. Many other movies at this time depicted similar anti-Asian sentiments. By 1968, however, the public support of the Vietnam War gradually declined as it was clear that America could not achieve victory. In response, war films started to lose their appeal in Hollywood. Alice's Restaurant, released in 1969, subtly ridiculed the United States draft efforts. Despite the positive progress of the reputation of Asian Americans in media, yellowface still persisted, even at the turn of the century. Miss Saigon, a famous Broadway show by the same producers as Les Miserables, casted white actors to play Vietnamese characters. In the HBO comedy series Tracy Takes On, Tracy Ullman donned yellowface to play her character Miss No Nang Nin, enraging some members of the Asian American community, though some thanked her for playing an underrepresented role of an Asian. One of the most prominent Asian stereotypes, the nerdy Asian, appeared during this time period as well. 1984 movies 16 Candles and Revenge of the Nerds promoted the stereotype and greatly exaggerated the role of the Asian nerdy character. This stereotype is still prominent in popular film and media today. Asian Americans also started appearing in more TV shows in addition to movies. The 1994 sitcom All American Girl, for example, centered around an all-Asian American cast featuring Margaret Cho, Jody Long, and B.D. Wong. Although the Asian American community perceived the show negatively, it nevertheless increased Asian American presence in the media and was progressive for its casting. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers is yet another example of rising Asian presence in media, casting Thuy Trang as the Yellow Ranger. Lastly, the popular television show 21 Jump Street featured Dustin Nguyen as one of its main characters.
The 20th century was a revolutionary time for Asian Americans in media. From Setsu Hayakawa to Anna May Wong, Nancy Kwan to Bruce Lee, the portrayal of Asian Americans in media was reinvented again and again. From the seductive evil villain to the sex symbol, from the manly martial artist to the nerdy teenage mathematician, the stereotypes of Asian Americans went through several iterations to arrive at the state it is in today. Perhaps the only thing that remained constant was the practice of yellowface, which was perpetuated all throughout the century and still exists even today. Overall, however, much progress has been made to promote the image of Asian Americans in media. One can only hope that it will continue to achieve new heights in the 21st century.